now told by scientists at the University of Northumbria in northern England that solar activity will fall by 60% during the 2030s to produce conditions last seen during the Little Ice Age that began in 1645. In other words, global freezing.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And what better news could Alan Jones have had for listeners on returning to the airwaves last week? Yes, all those global warming nuts are wrong, and we're hurtling back to another ice age, which, as Australia's most popular news site had told us 2 days earlier, could be just around the corner.
Earth faces a new mini ice age in the next 15 years, bringing year-round snowfields and turning normally ice-free waterways to sleet, scientists predict.
What? Even in Australia? Must be that Antarctic vortex again. Those chilling Ice Age warnings were based on a presentation to an astronomy conference in Wales by mathematics professor Valentina Zarkova. And her predictions of a sharp decline in sunspot activity from 2030 had already sent Britain's media into a frenzy, with the Daily Mail naturally leading the chorus, backed up by similar refrains in the UK Telegraph and the Independent, all of which plumped for pictures of London's River Thames frozen solid in days of old.
In England, during this Little Ice Age, River Thames frost fairs were held. In the winter of 1683 to 84, the Thames froze over for 7 weeks.
Yikes! Is this really going to happen again? Well, in short, the answer is no. As TV scientist Dr. Karl pointed out to a relieved Sonia Kruger on Channel 9's Mornings.
So just to clarify then...
To clarify.
No ice age in 15 years.
Just a cooling off. The chances of it happening are sort of the chances of the sun not rising tomorrow morning. Right. It is possible, but microscopic.
What Professor Zarkova was actually predicting was a new Maunder minimum, which describes a period of exceptionally low sunspot activity that occurred between 1645 and 1715. And while that was last seen during the mini ice age, as the Royal Astronomical Society told us in an ill-worded media release, it certainly did not cause the mini ice age to occur. The first frost fair on the River Thames was in 1608, almost 40 years before the Maunder minimum began. And the river was freezing over centuries before that, because the mini ice age, which only affected the Northern Hemisphere, began in 1450 or even earlier. And it lasted till well after the Maunder minimum had gone. Indeed, as the Royal Astronomical Society admitted to Media Watch,
no one is seriously suggesting the world is about to enter an ice age. The lesson for us is that even having that phrase in quotation marks was a mistake.
But like so many others in the media, Channel 7's Daily Edition didn't do its homework before getting environment commentator Joel Hurry to give us his expert views.
Looking way ahead, Joel, a really interesting report out by some scientists who have predicted a mini ice age in about 15 years.
How cool is this? You know, I'm a massive fan of Ice Age the movie and I watch it with my daughter all the time, and I figure that if it's going to happen, then, you know, let's embrace it.
But couldn't that have huge flow-on effects for agriculture and so on?
Oh, of course, definitely. Look, it is going to affect a lot of problems, but in the same sense, it's something truly special. You know, there was one that did happen in 1645 to 1715 in London, known as the Maunder minimum. So it has happened before. People survived that. I'm sure we'll be able to survive this one.
Dude knows his stuff, John,
doesn't he?
Well, yes. Apart from getting the name and gender of the scientist wrong and calling it a Maunder minimum. But why wouldn't he know his stuff? Seven's environment commentator is an actor, model and experienced TV presenter. But back to that ice age. And exactly how much colder could the Earth become if the Maunder minimum does return? Professor Zarkova doesn't know because she's not a climate scientist. But most predictions put it at around a very modest 0.2 degrees, which would be easily exceeded by predicted global warming. Which means temperatures will keep on rising without a new Maunder minimum, according to the Potsdam Climate Institute, and only marginally less if there is one. Yet this hasn't stopped some who really should know better from joining the hue and cry.
Chances of Little Ice Age on rise.
2 weeks before the latest Ice Age frenzy, the Australian's environment editor Graham Lloyd sounded the alarm on another British prediction of falling solar activity and issued this frosty warning to his readers.
The sun's power is weakening at its fastest rate in 9,300 years, doubling the odds of a return to Little Ice Age conditions by mid-century, according to research by the British Met Office.
Lloyd went on to warn about the rising odds of the big freeze returning.
The chance of a repeat of conditions that last occurred between 1645 and 1715, when London's Thames River regularly froze over and became the scene of winter fairs, was now rated at between 15 and 20%, up from 10% in 2010.
But once again, that is not what the scientists had said. The Met Office was also discussing the odds of a Maunder minimum returning, and predicting that if it were to happen, one could expect the Earth to cool by a little more than 0.1 degrees. And while the regional impact would be larger, between 0.4 and 0.8 degrees, even that would be
small compared with the modelled global warming.
Which, as the study's lead author, Sarah Innocent, explained, meant
even if we were to see a return to levels of solar activity not seen since the Maunder minimum, our winters would likely still be getting milder overall.
Lloyd did include the temperature figures in his story, and the Met's belief that global warming would be more powerful. Yet the Oz still kept the headline, chances of Little Ice Age rising, and Lloyd's two opening paragraphs, which is what everyone reads, about a return to Little Ice Age conditions. And the Australian's deputy editor, Peter Fray, defends that unreservedly.
For the life of me, I can't see how Graham's reporting here is a cause for alarm. It cites legit scientific research, contains legit news reporting, puts in the right amount of new information at the right time to assist readers, is presented in a classic news structure and contains context.
But enough of ice ages, and let's take a look at who makes money from one big switch.
Power surge. Thousands join campaign to cut electricity bills.
One Big Switch mobilises Australian consumers to sign up for cut price deals, obtained by their own bulk buying power. And since its launch in 2011, hundreds of thousands have joined up, thanks to headlines like this in the News Corp tabloids.
Big switch as health costs soar.
Insurance fight back.
Beat the Bowser Blues with people power.
In the last 3 years, we've seen more than 120 stories about One Big Switch in Sydney's Daily Telegraph alone, or almost one a week. And News Corp's other tabloids have written almost as many, with more than 300 stories between them. And should this latest campaign be a success,
join today to fight the cost of energy bills.
It won't just be consumers who cash in. As the Telly's article makes clear,
One Big Switch and News Corp will earn a commission from any accepted offers.
But it won't be only News Corp who takes a cut. As the fine print on the One Big Switch website reveals, 7 West Media will also get a commission if people transfer to One Big Switch's energy provider. And while News and 7 often declare this potential conflict of interest, they sometimes do not. As when 7 News launched the latest campaign to Queensland viewers.
One Big Switch wants 10,000 households to join forces, putting the power to negotiate real savings back into the hands of Queenslanders. More details of how you can join the campaign will be in the Courier Mail tomorrow and on our website.
No mention there, or on the website, that 7 had an interest in getting you to sign up. And no mention next day in the Courier Mail that News Corp also stood to make money. Or indeed the day after, although it did get included the third time they visited the story. So, how much money are News and 7 making? Well, we don't know and they won't tell. But our guess is a couple of $1 million a year between them, which would be handy in these tough times. And is there anything wrong with that? News Corp, which also owns 20% of One Big Switch, says no.
One Big Switch has helped tens of thousands of Australians save money on their bills. We only benefit when our readers benefit. There is no conflict of interest.
Well, maybe so. But why, after about 450 stories on One Big Switch, could News Corp's tabloids not find space for this ticking off from the corporate watchdog? Reported in The Age and Sydney Morning Herald Online on 30th of June and in the paper next day.
ASIC wraps knuckles over misleading One Big Switch adverts. The Australian Securities and Investments Commission said a review had found potentially false and misleading statements in the advertising for an insurance scheme run by One Big Switch last year.
Similar stories appeared in the Canberra Times and Australian Financial Review and across the APN network, which owns papers like the Toowoomba Chronicle.
ASIC orders One Big Switch to change its ways.
Which reported that One Big Switch had been operating without a financial services licence. So, is that a serious matter? The Consumer Action Law Centre thinks it is.
Not getting a licence is a big deal. That licence requires you to be a member of an ombudsman scheme and requires you to conduct your business honestly, fairly and efficiently. If anything went wrong, it may be more difficult to get a remedy.
None of the News Corp tabloids thought ASIC's reprimand was worth noting in the paper. Although a day after Fairfax broke the news, News Corp did run a story on its websites to say,
One Big Switch responds to concerns.
This reported that all was now fine and the highest standards would be maintained in future. And we hope they will. But when you're getting a cut from something you're selling, even if it's doing the consumer good, it's important to maintain the highest standards of journalism. And we think news fell short. But finally tonight, to a far worse example of key facts going missing.
Sheep stay silent in war of words over whether animals can suffer verbal abuse.
Last month, we ripped into that ridiculous story from ABC Rural about swearing at sheep, which headline writers and radio hosts across the country had seized on with hilarity.
Ken was accused of allowing behaviour that was distressing his sheep. So what was Ken doing? Was he physically harming them? No. Was he neglecting them? No. So what was it? Well, apparently some of Ken's shearers were filmed swearing at the sheep.
Websites in America, Britain and Australia also followed the flock and joined in the fun.
How dare you! Sheer rudeness against sheep.
Peter, you can't be calling them You'll hurt their feelings.
But, as we revealed, the original story by ABC Rural's reporter Cherie von Horschner was a bleat-up, in which Ken Turner, the owner of a sheep station near Broken Hill, was allowed to claim that people for the ethical treatment of animals had simply complained about his shearers swearing.
There was no actual, or to my knowledge, there was no actual cruelty on the job. The allegation was that bad language was used by an employee on the property in front of the sheep, and they could have been offended by the use of bad language.
Now that was simply not true, as ABC Rural well knew, because they'd been told by Peter before the broadcast that the allegations were far more serious. Specifically that
shearers working at Burrungi Station punched sheep in the face, punched a lamb in the torso, stomped and stood on sheep's heads and necks, struck them with a pipe and electric clippers until they bled, picked up one sheep by the hind legs and threw her head first through a gate, and crudely stitched up gaping wounds without any pain relief.
When we put our concerns to ABC Rural, they were unrepentant, saying their report was not misleading. We called that crap. And it seems the ABC agrees, because it has now ruled on Peter's complaint and found the original report to be materially misleading, lacking in context and in breach of 2 editorial standards. ABC Rural was also slammed for breaching a 3rd standard by failing to acknowledge its mistake. And to cap it all came sorry.
The ABC apologises for this lapse in editorial standards and for the length of time it has taken to take remedial and corrective action. As a result of your complaint, the online version of the story has now been removed. An on-air acknowledgement of inaccuracy will be broadcast on the Country Hour and Rural Report editions that ran the original story.
Raps on the knuckles don't come much harder than that. And you can read the full ABC response to Peter, plus a statement from the Australian and more on all tonight's stories on our Facebook page or our website, where you can get a transcript and download the programme. You can also catch up with us on iView and contact me or MediaWatch on Twitter. But for now, until next week, that's all from us. Goodbye.